Hello National 5 historians, and welcome to our next lesson on the topic from Nazi Germany, which is looking at the economic problems of the Weimar government in a little bit more detail. And in particular, we're thinking about the era between 1929 and 1933, also known as the Golden Age. Basically what we're trying to decide is, now that we know that hyperinflation was obviously a massive economic problem, and we know that some groups such as the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party were trying to take advantage of that, we're thinking about how this actually ended up stopping. Because obviously we know that Germany didn't just go into a massive bankruptcy from hyperinflation, and we're thinking about how that came to an end. So in particular, what we want to be able to do by the end of this lesson is to describe the work done by Charles Dawes and Gustav Stressman and how they both helped Germany to recover at this point in time. So quite often the economic recovery period for Germany, which is between 1924 and 1929, is known as the Stressman years. Gustav Stressman became the Chancellor of Germany in August 1923. He was also Foreign Minister, which was good because it allowed him to form relationships with other countries. Obviously a very important role if you are an economically struggling country that is looking to make trade agreements with some others. And he managed to establish a period of economic recovery for Germany between 1924 to 1929, which we now call the Golden Age of the Weimar Republic. Pretty much he brought hyperinflation under control and got people back into the workforce, and pretty much got Germany back on a kind of economic level pegging. And there's a lot of different strategies that he actually used to do this. So your first task then for this is going to be to read through the information on the next slide, and I want you to create a timeline of the events that he did. Now you can do this either as just like a line with the information on either side of it, you can do it as a mind map with information, you could choose to do it as a grid, that's absolutely fine, or you can choose to use some of the links that we've added into the team recently, talking about Canva, which is a really fun online way to kind of do it if you wanted to do it that way. So you're making a timeline using the next bits of information on the next slide. So this is the information you're going to use to build your timeline. Now be very careful because they are not in order as you see them coming up here. You're going to actually have to look through them and decide what bits of information you're going to need to put where on your timeline. So starting off in September 1923, Stressman ends the passive resistance that's happening in the Ruhr, and he orders the industries in that area to comply with the French demands. Gets them back to work and starts producing the money again and starts repaying the French and the Belgian soldiers that are in there. October of 1923, so a couple of weeks later, he brings in a new currency called the Rentemark and got rid of the old money altogether to deal with the hyperinflation issue. It gives the public a little bit more confidence in the money and in what they are able to do with that money now in Germany, whereas before it was just becoming ridiculous and spiralling out of control. This brand new amount of money that he's brought in, new currency, means that they feel more confident in the government and in the money that they're using. This obviously helps the German economy quite a lot. He's then looking in 1924, negotiating the Dawes plan, which we'll come back to in a minute or two, which pretty much was able to reduce the annual payments of reparations that they had to make to the countries as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, and it gave Germany a lot of large loans from the US to make these reparations easier to pay. So they could get the loans, pay off some of the reparations and use some of the other money as well to try and help stabilise Germany once more. So that one's 1924. Early in 1925, France and Belgium had also agreed to leave the Ruhr until the German industry got going again through negotiation as well, which was a good thing. Late in 1925 he signs the Locarno Treaty in Switzerland, which settles the border disputes in Europe and agrees where Germany is and where Germany is not, and that allows for movement and things like that, which is quite good. It also shows that he's willing to negotiate and he can be trusted to negotiate quite well. Germany gets a little bit more credibility back across Europe as a result of this. 1926, We've got Germany then being admitted into the League of Nations, which had obviously been established at the end of the war. They'd been told they weren't allowed to, but because he had shown himself, Stressman that is, as such a good negotiator, and that Germany was actually willing to make concessions at this point, they were willing to overlook that part of the treaty. And that's going to be kind of important for the German people, because not only does it allow their economy a little bit more stability, but it also increases the amount of pride that Germany feels. They don't quite feel like they're being left out as much as the Treaty of Versailles had made them feel, and it reduces some of the kind of anger about the Treaty of Versailles that they felt towards the Weimar Republic. Then, in 1929, in the last point on your timeline here, he introduces the Young Plan, which was a plan to reduce the reparation payments even further. So, pause the video, use the slide to develop your timeline of the Stressman years, and then continue the lesson to see a little bit more detail. So the question becomes, did hyperinflation just go away? And the answer to that is no. The general recovery was the result of two men, one German, one American, who we've mentioned. So the American was Charles Dawes, who you can see in this picture here. He realised, like quite a lot of other economists at this point in time across the world and across Europe especially, that the German economy was left in ruins when obviously the Treaty of Versailles had taken so much from them, and then this invasion of the Ruhr and the hyperinflation crisis. And that if it was continued to be left this way, then the whole economy of Europe would potentially become unstable. So the issue with missed reparations still had to be sorted out. Trade had slumped and Germany was pretty much wrecked. It couldn't even start to properly pay these things back, which meant that the other countries couldn't afford to start rebuilding and fixing things after the amount of money they'd put into the war. It was becoming a vicious cycle that needed someone to put a stop to it. So they introduced the Dawes Plan. He arranged for the US to lend Germany quite a lot of money, which would be used to help Germany get back on its feet. August 1924, the Dawes Plan arranged for, first of all, the French and Belgian troops to leave the Ruhr, the reparation payments to begin again at 1 billion marks in the first year, and then increasing to 2.5 billion marks each year after 5 years, until eventually it was all paid back. The Reichsbank to be recognised, and a new paper currency to be introduced in Germany. And all of these things together would help Germany to kind of stop hyperinflation and to get itself back into a more comfortable economic situation. Essentially, it was a point that a weak Germany created an unstable European economy, which is what Britain had been concerned about during the Treaty of Versailles negotiations. It went like this. So the USA loans Germany money. Germany can pay reparations to Great Britain and France. Great Britain and France can then pay their war debts to the US. It is a win-win situation for the US, and it is a foreign policy win for Germany at this point in time. This is an example of the Dawes Plan in a little bit more detail, and what you should do is pause the video here and make a copy of this diagram in your notes, or take a photo of it and add it into your notes. But pause the video and add this in. So the Dawes Plan was definitely a success, because at first it provided a short-term economic recovery and benefits to the German economy, and it made the reparations much easier. The new paper money gave German people confidence, and businesses and employment started to recover, businesses started to open again. As the economy starts to grow, international confidence in Germany starts to increase, so more foreign loans are then available and people are investing in Germany once more. For most people in Germany then, it means that jobs become available, they've got money in their pockets to spend, and it seems to them genuinely like the worst of what they had to suffer was now over. The bad days were over and they could look forward to moving on for the first time since the war. Stressman was actually only Chancellor in 1923. His main role was then as Foreign Minister from 1924, He was a right-winger, definitely more able than Eber had been, and it's because of him that Germany pretty much was built up to prosperity again. Although all of Europe was recovering, Germany started to kind of pull ahead a little bit of that and started to actually have a little bit more stable economy than possibly would have been expected of them. Germany's recovery in the 1920s is also really closely linked to Stressman because of the following three things. He sorted out the economy, he made Germany internationally respectable to the point they're allowed to join the League of Nations again, and he gave the German people pride and confidence in the future. He pretty much took the very negative views of the Weimar Republic and turned them on their head. He made the people of Germany really feel like they had a little bit more confidence in their government. How he did it? Quite simply, 5 steps. He brings hyperinflation under control by ordering all of the old banknotes to be collected and burned, and then issuing these new notes, the Rentemarks. He got a political boost when the German industry recovered after the French and Belgian troops left the Ruhr, and people felt like he was definitely the right man for the job. He restored the confidence in the German currency as a result of this, and once people had the confidence with this, then they knew that they could invest in new German businesses, and because these businesses opened, unemployment went down and people started to actually have money to spend and goods to actually spend it on. Then in 1929 he reaches this agreement with the US to reduce the reparation payments even further in the Young Plan, which more or less stabilised the German economy completely. In terms of international relations, he took on 2 jobs in the Reichstag, both as Chancellor for that 1 year and as Foreign Minister, that made him in charge of the foreign relations. Knowing that Germany's neighbours were really afraid Germany would potentially start trouble again, he made it his mission to reassure them that they had absolutely nothing to be afraid of, and that Germany was not all about trying to seize control and seize power and land like France was worried about. And the Treaty of Locarno in 1925 was a way of kind of doing this. By agreeing these are the borders to Germany and everyone agreeing and signing that, he made it very clear that Germany was focused on developing Germany rather than trying to potentially start another war to gain land or to gain back the things that it had lost in the Treaty of Versailles. This is definitely a big move towards peace and trust within Europe again, because up to this point Germany had kept saying that they didn't accept the Treaty of Versailles, this whole kind of stab Germany in the back element, that it was really very much clear that the German people were not on board with the Treaty of Versailles, even though it had been signed, and they wanted to change it. Locarno was basically the way of the German government accepting, and the German people accepting the Treaty of Versailles, this time not under duress, by just accepting it and being the ones to sign it willingly. So the Locarno Treaty in a wee bit in more detail. Absolutely huge move towards peace in Europe, because obviously Germany had continued to call the Treaty of Versailles a diktat. Remember, a forced treaty, a dictated treaty at this point. There's still huge tension in Europe as a result of it, but this was kind of Germany finally really accepting the blame for World War I and not demanding any more change. In return, France and Belgium agreed to accept the borders as drawn up by the Treaty of Versailles, and they also agreed that they would not invade Germany again. So, like the Ruhr region, what they had done that had sparked off the hyperinflation crisis, they would never be able to do that again. Why was it important for them to ultimately leave the Ruhr? Really, the reason for this is because it was the economic strong point for Germany. They needed it in order to get the country back on its feet. Then in 1926 we have the League of Nations. Stressman had made Germany even more internationally respectable, and then as a result the country became a full member of the League of Nations. The League of Nations had a couple of different aims. It aimed to, first of all, follow the principle of collective security, which pretty much meant that you didn't need to have separate alliances with other countries or secret alliances with other countries, because members of the League would protect one another from any sort of foreign aggression. And if a member of the League did try to invade, the rest of the members of the League would actually help them. It worked towards international disarmament, so all member countries anyway across the world would reduce how many weapons, how many areas that they had within their military, how many people they had within the military and things as well, so that everybody had the same number and nobody felt threatened because another country was building more. So think about the causes of the First World War and think about how this had led to the sort of distrust and things as well. They aimed to improve the living and working conditions of all people in their membership countries, and that could mean that they would give aid and support to any country that was suffering or was falling behind in these living and working conditions compared to the other members. It encouraged, more importantly than anything else, cooperation between the nations, and it made everybody feel like that they were being accepted and on the same foot as one another, rather than Germany's feeling of being left behind because of what had happened in the First World War. So Stressman's achievements then. He ended passive resistance, gave the German industry a kickstart. He brings in this new currency. The Dawes Plan makes it easier to pay reparations through the loans and the reductions. Locarno Treaty finally reduces the tensions in Europe. France and Belgium agree to leave the Ruhr and properly leave it. The Young Plan reduces the reparation payments even further, and the League of Nations accepts Germany back into the international community. Huge step forward for Germany and a good amount of confidence in the Weimar Republic for the first time by the German people. Now, if Germany was doing so well, what was going on with the Nazis during this period? So before the Beer Hall Putsch, they had about 50,000 members. After the Beer Hall Putsch, they're banned as a political party until 1925. Hitler is released from prison in December 1924, and he comes out to find that a lot has actually changed across Germany. The economy has been revived, bars, clubs, theatres, restaurants are all open again and are doing really well. The taxes being paid actually also allowed for schools and hospitals and roads and things like that to be built, which led to almost a period of full employment at this point in time, again reducing the amount of people who were angry with the Weimar Republic, and Nazi support is definitely falling. By 1928 they had 12 seats in the Reichstag, which was less than 3% of the population voting for them. So genuinely it seems to be that when things are going well, the Nazi party, the extremist parties like them, don't actually have as much focus, and the people are not voting for them. This is kind of what it looks like between 1924 and 1933, and you can kind of see, if we look at each one, the Communist Party in May 1924 and how many votes they kind of have, and then you can see the Social Democratic Party, and again quite a number, and you've got the Nazi Party down here at the bottom. Now obviously the point we're talking about is here, so it's quite high. It's not really very, very high, but not too many, not too bad. And then it definitely significantly drops by 1924 when Hitler's released from prison, and then we've got another significant drop by May 1928. However, what you will notice is that as time goes on, so 1930, 1932, okay, 1933, this number starts to go up again. So up to 1929, in the golden age of Weimar, people are really not interested in what the Nazis have to say, and it seems unlikely that they will actually be able to achieve power the way Hitler had decided in prison that they should. The Munich Putsch, remember, had taught him that he had to get power politically, and yet this doesn't seem to be likely to happen at this point. So ultimately, what went wrong for Germany that led to this very clear slow death of the Nazi party turning around and them becoming more popular again? Well, one of the first things that happen is that Gustav Stresemann dies in 1929, But just before his death, he actually said the following quote. He said, "The economic position is only flourishing on the surface. Germany is in fact dancing on a volcano. If the short-term credits are called in, a large section of our economy will collapse." Pretty much what he's saying is it looks great on the surface, but actually the economic recovery is only in its very early stages and it doesn't go very deep. All it will take, if we're not very careful, is for these loans that are the way that Germany is establishing itself and its safety net to be called in. And ultimately, when Stressman dies, there isn't someone as able and willing to actually lead them through this recovery as he was. But then also in 1930, the Wall Street crash happens, and unfortunately the US do actually recall their loans, plunging Germany back into a period of political and economic unrest. So, summary anagram for you to unanagram and write into your notes as a summary. And your assignment task for this week, for this lesson, is going to be to take a picture of your timeline and upload it to the assignment tab. If you've got any questions or anything you're not sure about, let someone know in your team or email and let us know if you have any problems.